Focus outward heals. Focus inward makes you ill. This wisdom forms the central thread of this lecture. At first glance, it sounds provocative. Could it really be unhealthy to listen to oneself? In fact, psychology and experiential wisdom indicate that excessive self-reflection often intensifies suffering, while an outward-directed focus can have a healing effect. When we are too caught up in our own head and body, we lose connection to the world. When we direct our attention to other people, tasks, or nature instead, we often experience relief and healing. In this lecture, we want to calmly and thoughtfully explore why this is so and how this philosophy is reflected in happiness, health, and even chronic illnesses. Everyday observations. Distraction makes symptoms fade. Let's start with everyday life. Perhaps you know this. You feel unwell or are in pain, but then something exciting happens. A good conversation, an engaging film, an urgent project, and suddenly you barely notice the symptoms anymore. Distraction can temporarily push pain and discomfort into the background. Medical studies confirm this phenomenon. Pain becomes intense only when it's at the center of our attention. However, when we are mentally challenged or emotionally engaged, the brain activates its own pain inhibitors. In one study, participants felt significantly less heat pain during a difficult memory task compared to an easy task. fMRI showed that pain signals in the spinal cord were dampened by cognitive effort. Science calls this phenomenon stress-induced analgesia. In acute, stressful, or dangerous situations, our body produces increased endogenous opiates and cannabinoids that numb the pain so we can remain functional. Only in quiet moments does the pain return. A famous example, soccer goalkeeper Bert Troutman finished playing a cup final in 1956 despite a broken neck. He was so focused on victory and adrenaline that he initially didn't notice the pain. Conversely, we all know the throbbing pain of a tooth that becomes unbearable, especially in the evening when trying to fall asleep, when there are no distractions. This everyday pattern, pain and symptoms decrease when the mind is elsewhere, already hints at the truth of the wisdom, the healing power of outward focus. Another everyday observation. In times of crisis, people often turn outward. Historical data shows that suicide rates paradoxically decrease during wartime. Many people are then focused on survival in the external world and less on brooding over their own misfortune. This should not romanticize suffering, but it illustrates when a strong external goal binds our attention, in this case survival, inner despair recedes. We forget ourselves to some extent, and therein often lies relief. Application to chronic conditions, chronic fatigue, pain, migraine, autoimmune diseases.
What do these insights mean for chronic illnesses? Many long-term conditions come with an understandable tendency to constantly listen inward. One continuously scans the body for fatigue, pain, or new symptoms. But this constant internal monitoring can become a trap. Chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, migraine, or autoimmune diseases, all these conditions can be characterized by a vicious cycle of attention and symptom amplification. Modern neuroscience speaks of interoceptive predictions of the brain. In chronic pain, for example, the brain has learned to interpret certain signals as pain and actually expects the pain. This expectation, combined with fear and constant body scanning, then becomes self-fulfilling. A neural pain memory keeps firing. In other words, chronic pain can be a learned pattern that is maintained by fear and internal focus. Negative expectation intensifies the suffering, a classic nocebo effect, where the fear of symptoms actually makes the symptoms worse. Studies estimate that about 1 in 7 people have chronic symptoms without organic cause, pain, exhaustion, digestive issues, often generated by the brain and maintained by attention patterns. Here, relearning can help. If one succeeds in breaking the vicious cycle, reducing fear, and gently redirecting focus back to life, even years of pain and exhaustion states can improve or resolve. In autoimmune diseases, our immune system goes haywire. Here too there are fascinating indications that conditioned responses and psychological factors play a role. Psychoneuroimmunology has shown that immune responses can be trained. For example, in allergy sufferers, sometimes just the image of a flower is enough to trigger a real allergic reaction because the brain visually recognizes the allergen. Conversely, in experiments, the immune system could be calmed through a taste coupled with medication. Allergy patients received a green drink several times together with an antihistamine. Later, the drink alone triggered a dampened immune response. Such findings show the psyche can co-regulate immune processes, both to our detriment, conditioned overreactions, and to our benefit, learned relief. Applied to chronic inflammation and autoimmune conditions, this means when we mentally constantly focus on our body symptoms and harbor catastrophic thoughts, we might unconsciously fuel the physical stress and immune response. The body reacts to the internal state of alarm, inflammation flares up, an interoception trap where constant self-observation maintains the suffering. The hypothesis thus states, chronic complaints are sometimes maintained by conditioned body reactions plus interoceptive hypervigilance, excessive internal attention. Healing requires breaking this cycle by gently directing focus outward, away from constant symptom monitoring. Explanation of the hypothesis: conditioned immune response and interoception trap.
How exactly can we imagine this internal focus trap? Let's consider someone with chronic headaches. When the person scans every tiny sensation in their head, anticipating the next pain, they often become alarmed even at mild tension. Oh no, it's starting again. Fear rises, the body releases stress hormones, and indeed the pain intensifies. The expectation it will get worse becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Psychologists call this catastrophizing. Under the internal magnifying glass, pain feels stronger. One panics, which further intensifies the pain. Thus emerges a vicious cycle that can contribute to chronification. The same applies to exhaustion. Those suffering from chronic fatigue often meticulously monitor every sign of weakness. If they feel somewhat better one day and undertake something, they constantly check inward. Will I be completely exhausted soon? This constant self-examination paradoxically increases mental load and stress. This is called interoceptive hypervigilance, meaning excessive vigilance toward internal signals. Studies on anxiety disorders and somatoform complaints show that affected individuals monitor their body more intensely and thereby actually perceive more symptoms than others. They have a better perception of internal processes, which is often misinterpreted. Tiny normal fluctuations are interpreted as signs of illness. Attention directed inward thus makes us hypersensitive and prone to feeling ill, even when there is no new pathological finding. This is where Viktor Frankl's principle of de-reflection in logotherapy comes into play. Frankl noticed that many problems, whether psychological or physical, worsen the more doggedly one observes and tries to solve them. His technique of de-reflection, therefore, directs attention away from symptoms towards something larger, for example, a meaningful task. A classic example is sexual dysfunction. Those who anxiously focus on their performance block themselves. Only when focus shifts away from one's own body can natural reaction occur. Frankl describes how emotional wounds can heal when we let them breathe and don't constantly mentally scratch at them, just as physical wounds heal better when we stop constant scratching. Applied, this means the ego must also be allowed to fall silent sometimes for healing to occur. When we leave inner pain, fear, and symptoms unobserved for a while, giving them less significance, self-regulation often sets in. Of course, this requires patience and trust,
And it's not a plea for suppressing serious problems. It's about the many cases where constant rumination and body scanning make things worse rather than better. Don't fight with your inner life. We always lose there, as Dr. Oliver Korn aptly put it. Instead, it helps to endure the uncertain state without giving it full attention. The unpleasant feelings and sensations may be present, but we direct our gaze back to life outside in parallel.
In the moment we stop frantically trying to fix ourselves, space opens up for recovery. Scientific basis: psychoneuroimmunology, flow, extroversion, hypervigilance.
The idea of healing through outward focus is supported by several scientific concepts. Psychoneuroimmunology. This field of research shows how psyche, nervous system, and immune system are intertwined. We've already seen the example of conditioned allergies. Thoughts, expectations, and attention can measurably influence immune reactions. Chronic psychological stress, for instance, intensifies inflammatory processes, while relaxation and positive emotions modulate the immune system. When strong internal focus constantly creates stress, anxiety, ruminating about symptoms, the body remains on high alert. Healing at the physical level is inhibited. When we direct our attention outward to something positive or challenging, the stress system powers down and the immune system can better shift into repair mode. Following the motto, when the mind comes to rest, the body can do what it naturally does best: heal. Flow state. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi coined the term flow for a state of complete immersion in an activity. In flow, we are highly concentrated, happy, and absorbed in the activity, such that worries, sense of time, and even self-awareness are largely blocked out. It's an extreme example of focused outer self. One merges with the doing or with other participants, such as when making music in an ensemble. The ego steps into the background. Interestingly, people in flow report high creativity, productivity, and fulfillment. Happiness becomes, analogous to Frankl's concept, a byproduct of engagement. Neuroscientifically, it has been found that in flow, the brain is so busy, up to 110 bits per second information processing, that no capacity remains to think about oneself or feel pain. One's own existence is quasi-suspended during the creative process, and many feel this as liberating and even healing for the soul. After a flow experience, mood improves, stress hormones decrease, one feels alive. Regular flow experiences, whether in work, hobby, or sports, correlate with higher well-being and can prevent burnout long-term because one draws positive emotions and meaning. Flow is thus a prime example of how focus outward, on doing, contributes to happiness and health. Extroversion and social connection. Personality research has long observed that extroverted people tend to be happier and healthier than strongly introverted ones, at least in many cultures. Extroversion means not just sociability, but generally outward-directed energy. Extroverts actively seek social contacts, new experiences, exchange with the environment. This turning toward the world often goes hand in hand with positive emotionality, the ability to experience joy and enthusiasm in interaction with the environment. No wonder, then, that social activities and engagement protect against loneliness and rumination. Those who spend time with friends, engage in groups, or even just chat friendly with strangers have less opportunity to withdraw into their own negative thoughts.
Numerous studies show that social support and a sense of connection buffer stress and strengthen mental health. Even introverts benefit from occasionally forcing themselves into extroverted behavior. In experiments, consciously going out of oneself led to more positive mood in reserved people. Of course, everyone needs time to themselves. But when focus is exclusively directed inward, well-being suffers. As Dr. Korn formulated, in people who suffer strongly psychologically, one always finds attention clearly directed inward. Unpleasant thoughts and feelings circle endlessly and make one incapable of action. The way out usually leads through refocusing outward, small steps into the world, despite the discomfort, whereby emotional life gradually normalizes. Interoceptive hypervigilance versus serenity. Physiologically, too, we see how an outward-directed focus relaxes the body. For example, those who constantly monitor their pulse or breathing can thereby actually generate stress symptoms. Heart palpitations or shortness of breath are perceived more intensely, which triggers alarm reactions. In contrast, conscious letting go of body signals can have an amazingly calming effect. In behavioral therapy, patients with panic disorder are often taught attention shifting, away from the threateningly perceived heartbeat toward an external task, for example, name 5 things in the room. This reduces anxiety and promptly heart rate and breathing normalize. Here it shows that our brain has limited capacity. It cannot direct full attention inward and outward simultaneously. If we use this capacity to orient ourselves outward, many internal processes run more quietly automatically. Moreover, we know from pain research that fear and helplessness intensify pain, while control and meaning alleviate it. As soon as we only view pain under the microscope and despair, it burns itself in. But if we succeed in putting pain in context, like why does it hurt, what could it be good for, subjective suffering decreases. Mothers, for example, better endure labor pain when they understand that the pain shows them how to move to help the baby. The pain gains meaning and is thereby perceived as less severe. Here, too, a focus on something outside one's own pain, in this case the child or the goal of birth, changes the experience of pain positively. Philosophical context. Frankl, Nietzsche, Lao Tzu, Buddha, universal patterns.
The idea of healing occurs when the ego falls silent is found in various forms in major philosophical and spiritual traditions. We've already mentioned Viktor Frankl. His whole concept of logotherapy is based on the premise that humans must find meaning that points beyond themselves. Frankl wrote, "Happiness cannot be pursued directly. It is a side effect of a meaningful life. Those who follow a why, be it a task, love, or faith, receive happiness and mental health as a gift, simply because they don't constantly chase after it." Frankl likes to quote Friedrich Nietzsche here. "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." This Nietzsche quote hits the nail on the head. A higher purpose, why, directs the gaze away from one's own suffering, how, making the suffering bearable. People with such life meaning mobilize unexpected strengths and despair less easily because they don't get lost in trivialities. Nietzsche and Frankl warn conversely, those who don't see meaning and value in life will become sick in soul. Meaninglessness and constant narcissism, only circling around one's own ego, make ill, while self-transcendence, going beyond oneself, makes the soul flourish. In Eastern philosophy, we find similar thoughts. Lao Tzu teaches the principle of Wu Wei, often translated as non-interference or effortless action. It means a state where one is so in harmony with the natural flow of things that right actions arise without forced ego calculation. Non-action thus doesn't mean passivity, but that one doesn't tensely steer from the ego, but allows the greater whole to work through oneself. Those who practice Wu Wei let go of excessive self-reference and often experience thereby that things fall into place by themselves. In health terms, this means the body naturally has self-healing powers. Too much willful control and rumination, focus inward, can block this flow. By living outward and not tensing up, we allow the Tao, the course of the world, or our own organism to find its balance again. Through non-forcing, everything happens, one could paraphrase Lao Tzu. This reminds of the flow state and Frankl's de-reflection, letting go of ego consciousness in favor of a natural order. In Buddhism, Attachment to ego is considered the main cause of suffering. Buddha recognized that the feeling of a separate, constantly desiring ego makes us unsatisfied and causes pain. Excessive self-reference, greed, and aversion, all revolving around what do I want, what do I fear, lead to dukkha, suffering. Liberation consists in seeing through and letting go of the illusion of the separate self. Compassion and mindfulness are two paths to this. In compassion, we lovingly direct focus on other beings, dissolving narrow self-interest. In mindfulness meditation, one learns to let thoughts and sensations come and go without identifying with them. One observes them quasi from outside, instead of being entangled in them inside. The result?
Less unnecessary suffering, more inner peace. Interestingly, studies show that meditation can actually alleviate pain and stress because the meditator learns to accept the signals but no longer constantly anxiously react to them. This too is a form of outer focus, not in terms of distraction, but in terms of meta-perspective. One stands a step outside one's own ego film. Philosophically, one can say, there are universal patterns whereby happiness and health thrive when we understand ourselves as part of a greater whole. Whether one calls it God, Tao, natural law, or cosmic order, many thinkers have noticed that the world is amazingly meaningfully structured when one gains distance from one's own small-mindedness. Albert Einstein said, "The most important decisive thing in existence is what we don't have under control." And physicist Paul Dirac wrote in 1963, "It seems that God is a mathematician of a very high order. He designed the universe in an incredibly elegant mathematical structure." This feeling that life follows a logic, an order outside our small self, can be very comforting and healing. If God as mathematician created perfect rules, we don't have to solve every problem alone through tension. We may trust, open ourselves, be part of the equation, instead of the center point. This sounds abstract, but concretely it means letting go, surrender, belief in something greater. All this shifts focus away from the sickening ego center. Nietzsche expressed it drastically. You go to your neighbor and take yourself with you, and that's exactly what you'd like to overcome. By this he meant that we are often still egoistic even in altruism when we take ourselves too importantly. The challenge is to serve or create truly self-forgettingly. In such moments, mystics of all religions say, healing happens by itself. Think of compassionate monks or nuns who are completely absorbed in caring for others. They often radiate deep contentment and health into old age. It's as if they carry an energy that goes beyond their individual ego. Examples of healing outward focus: gratitude, helping, maternal role.
Let's look at some practical examples where focus outward shows healing effect. Gratitude is, by definition, directed outward. One directs attention to the good that has been given, whether through other people, life, or fate. Those who are grateful don't dwell in inner scarcity thinking, what's missing from me, but in appreciation of what is. Studies have impressively shown that gratitude improves psychological and physical health. Grateful people sleep better, have fewer depressive symptoms, strengthen their social network, and even biological markers like heart rate variability or inflammation values are more favorable. A recent longitudinal study found that high gratitude values correlate with lower mortality. Apparently, grateful people live longer on average. Why? Presumably because gratitude reduces stress and promotes positive emotions, which in turn leads to healthier behavior, like active lifestyle, willingness for prevention. One feels embedded in something larger, acknowledges sources of happiness other than just oneself. And this letting go of self-focus tremendously relieves. Many begin or end the day consciously with a few gratitude thoughts. This directs the inner spotlights outward to life's abundance instead of inward to possible deficits. Helping and giving. Similarly with altruism. Those who help others, whether neighbors, volunteering for strangers, or just doing small favors in daily life, often experience a helper's high. The brain releases dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, bringing feelings of happiness and relaxation. Social neurochemistry thus rewards us for giving. Numerous studies confirm. People who regularly engage for others have better mood, higher self-esteem, and more life satisfaction.
They're often physically healthier and live longer too. One study even showed that helping others buffers the relationship between stress and mortality, meaning stressed people who do nothing for others had increased mortality rates, but stressed people who cared for others didn't show this increase. That's remarkable. Caring for others protects oneself from the effects of stress. One could say neighborly love activates something like a secret resilience. There's this beautiful saying, "What you give, you get back 1,000-fold." In health terms, this apparently really holds true. By giving our energy outward, we become internally richer and stronger. An example is the maternal role. Mothers, and of course fathers too, often experience growing beyond themselves when it comes to their children's welfare. Even dead tired or sick, parents suddenly find energy to comfort the feverish child at night. The loving focus on the child seems to biochemically release hormones that ease pain and mobilize strength.
In fact, there's the concept of the tend and befriend response, discovered by psychologist Shelley Taylor. It states that especially women under stress tend to nurture and connect rather than fight or flee. The hormone oxytocin plays a key role. It's increasingly released when women care for their children or support each other socially. Oxytocin has a calming effect, lowers pulse and cortisol, and creates trust and calm. Thus, maternal stress reduces itself as nature counteracts with bonding hormones. The result? Despite external strain, the mother feels inner meaning and often even serenity. Many mothers report that during child-rearing they had no time to be sick and actually got sick less often, not because they shouldn't have rested, but because the outward focus on the children apparently helped their immune systems stay on course. Of course, parenting can also be exhausting, no question, but at best, devotion to the child also gives back enormous fulfillment and resilience. Social support among friends belongs here too. In difficult times, women, and many men too, tend to come together, talk things through, help practically. All this is part of the tend and befriend response. It heals emotionally when one is there for someone or others are there for oneself. The mutual care directs away from one's own pain and releases positive emotions. Many recovery processes are set in motion because people are there for each other, whether it's the neighbor who regularly checks in, the circle of friends creating distraction, or the self-help group where one can openly talk about everything. Here the attention of all involved flows outward and simultaneously toward each other, a beautiful cycle that strengthens everyone. Conclusion: healing, happiness, and health as byproducts of an outward-directed life.
Let us quietly review the essential points once more. We have seen that happiness and health usually arise indirectly. Those who tensely seek their own well-being constantly listen inward and give highest importance to every discomfort, paradoxically often block their path to improvement. Focus inward makes ill. As pointed as this sentence sounds, we find it confirmed in depression, chronic pain and burnout. Too much self-reference, rumination, and introspection intensify suffering. The healing alternative is to direct consciousness more outward, toward other people, meaningful activities, the here and now of the world around us. This outward focus heals because it releases us from narrow ego entanglement. Body and soul may come into balance when the ego takes a break. Healing happens when the ego falls silent. In such moments, health often happens by itself. Happiness and well-being arise as byproducts without force. Of course, this doesn't mean completely forgetting oneself or ignoring needs. It's about balance, a life that's lived instead of being missed through analysis. When we're engaged externally, enthusiastically absorbed in a project, lovingly invested in others, amazedly contemplating nature, humorously conversing with friends, then we're present and simultaneously free. Life carries us instead of us having to carry it. In this attitude lies serenity and strength. Viktor Frankl summarized it thus: happiness comes to those who find meaning without chasing after it. Happiness and health cannot be directly forced. They arise as gifts when we do what we're meant for, namely, entering into relationship with the world.
An outward-directed life, characterized by meaning, love of neighbor, activity, and trust, may not prevent all illnesses, but it helps us to a resilient, fulfilled existence where suffering is better processed and joy more deeply experienced. Perhaps you'll remember, next time you have a small ailment or gloomy mood, instead of tensely listening inward, take a step outward. Look up, look around, do a well-meant favor for someone else, or dedicate yourself to a task with all your heart. It's amazing how often things then improve by themselves. Sometimes the pain disappears, often the mood brightens, almost always the problem moves into healthy proportion. For outward focus heals, while the inward-directed gaze too easily gets lost in problems. In the end stands the insight: happiness and health are byproducts of a meaningful life outside narrow self-occupation. Those who have found their why in life, be it love, task, faith, or curiosity about the world, not only bear almost any how, but often discover that healing and contentment follow as if by themselves. In the moment we forget ourselves, we are closest to life's actual core. And exactly there waits, quietly smiling, happiness. Thank you for listening and thinking along.
May we all repeatedly find the courage to trustingly direct our focus outward, and may we thereby experience how much healing power lies in letting go and being connected with the world.